right, here, back segment 2. We're going to start talking about Tari Eason as our first player that we're going to highlight. We're going to get into, I don't know, maybe 20 different guys. Look at these beautiful graphics. Left side, fully formed. Right side, still in progress. But look how gorgeous this is. Eric, you want to walk us through this beautiful basketball card?
Yeah, first off, this is a basketball card.
Thank you.
Not a baseball card. I put his name on there. I also selected a photo of him, and then where he went to school, and that he's a forward.
I regret throwing to you for this segment. Really good, really cool. Let's get into it. We're going to do a couple. We want to have sort of a cohesive way of going about these. So I have some notes. I took Tari Eason. Wrote about Tari, by the way, last week. You can go check that out as well. We also use some great resources. I want to give a shout out to Adam Spinella, who's been on the show, friend of the show, Adam Spinella, who does a great job getting into all these, making videos for all the top prospects that I highly recommend people go and check out. So here's Tari Eason. He's 21 years old, played at LSU. He actually played, I believe, at Cincinnati for a season win. Maybe you can help me with this, and then transferred to LSU, I believe. And then had a season here. Just to start off, I want to start with physical traits here. Yeah, that's too choppy, Kale. It doesn't look like it's going to work, sadly, appropriately enough. But 6'8", 220, good wingspan. Here's the thing. Physically, and I don't want you to get lost because it's a very different player. Physically, he has the profile of a Wilson Chandler. Like if you were just looking at like what does he look like on the court, like size wise, I think it's Wilson Chandler. And then he has this crazy 7'2" wingspan that's absolutely insane, and it serves him very well on the defensive end. So if you picture Wilson Chandler and then like stylistic comps, man, these are hard to come by. The comp I have when I'm watching him, Harrison, this might actually be before all you guys. It kind of reminds me of Leon Poe. Do you guys remember the Leon Poe era in Boston? At all?
I did not get that impression at all. But
I mean, I could be way off on these. There's in fact, it might be right. But the reason I say that is that he's kind of raw, but he's kind of like Torrey Craig-esque almost, and like he produces. His numbers are really good. You look at that: 17 points per game, 6.5 rebounds per game. The counting stats defensively: 1.9 steals per game, 1.1 blocks is like really wild. Those are really good, especially for the minute. I think he played around 25 minutes per game. So he produces. But it's a little clunky and it's a little bit ugly. The first thing I'll say about his measurables, you might like this one, male form corner. Elite measurables, he's got really low hips. Like when you watch him play, well, it's like the opposite of Bol, right? Whose hips were like so high up. Like his hips
do not lie.
Yeah, he has like low hips, and I think it gives him a lower center of gravity, like really good balance. The thing about him is he's 6'8", but he kind of moves like a guard defensively. He's just reacts really, really well, slides left to right, guards the perimeter really well, extremely long, and it just makes him so disruptive because he's got those long arms, long contests, and on the perimeter, I just feel like he's going to be able to guard, a lot of positions. But low hip. Like when you watch him, you'll kind of see what I'm talking about. He looks like a long torso guy.
This is like when a baby is born and you don't talk about its height, you talk about its length or the amount of months it's been alive. When you talk about low hips, what you're really talking about is short legs. He has short legs, but I love that you framed it as low hips.
Someone shows you their baby, you're like, I don't know, man.
You're like, no, you're like, how long is that baby? Like, we're talking about height, right? The man has short legs, but I'm interested.
He doesn't have short legs. I mean, this is the thing. Like, you make it sound. This is my thing about basketball in general is that you're talking about very abnormally shaped people to begin with. They almost all have something weird about their physical traits. This is his, and it serves him. Again, I think the reason I bring it up is because he's really mobile on the perimeter, especially defensively.
I gotta say,
go ahead.
Oh, just quickly. I'm sorry. I'll derail this, but I'm just in my time watching basketball as a moron and just a guy, an observer of life and things outside of what other people watch basketball with. I've noticed long arms, almost the most important thing in basketball. Long arms, big hands. With the one exception of Desmond Bane. But Desmond Bane is the one guy that breaks this. He has the shortest arms in the NBA. Somehow he's dominant. Everybody else with long arms is somehow awesome.
Well, I'm glad you bring up that point, D-Line, because you know who measured the widest hands at the NBA Combine just this last week? It was Tari Eason.
The widest
11-inch wide hands.
Does this count as addressing a weakness for the Nuggets?
Maybe.
Hand
He had
size.
the third
Just
longest
properly
hands
sized
and
hands.
the widest hands at
All right,
the
I'm
entire
updating. I'm
Combine.
updating my physical comp again. This
Yeah,
is not
yeah, yeah.
stylistic comp. I'm updating it to Kawhi Leonard. And actually, one of the reasons he is like physically, he really is.
Let's go.
If you want to know something
Draft
actually
him.
kind of funny, Kawhi Leonard also kind of low hips.
Oh,
So here-
short
Here's-
legs.
yeah. My take on Tari Eason is the reason I looked into him is because last week I wrote about 3 prospects who could maybe in some way be this year's version of Herb Jones, which like that's the guy the Nuggets are trying to find this year. Or Herb Jones.
Hold up. That's every year there's a new. Are we going to find the next whatever? And this year it's Herb Jones. Like he was so
Right.
good late in the pick.
Yeah.
This year, next
We're
Herb
not
Jones.
gonna. Just there'll be a new the guy though. You're right. I
All
hear
I'm
what you're saying.
saying is the Nuggets are going to look to find somebody who is a high upside defender,
Yeah.
is long, whose probably best position is the 3. If they had it their way, like a 3 or maybe like a big 2, a guy who can play really good defense, and a guy that hopefully can contribute sooner rather than later. I think that's the mold of a best case scenario draft prospect for Denver.
Yeah.
And I mean, Tari Eason, he's not Herb Jones because what people forget about Herb Jones is he was a 4-year player in college. He was, somewhat polished for a guy coming out. Like he played in a ton of big games. He played, a ton of basketball in the SEC. Eason is a lot more raw, but if you look at some of their numbers, like Herb Jones and Tari Eason, I think there's definitely a comparison to be made there. I mean, Herb Jones last year, one of the big stats about him was he was the only player in a high major conference to record a block percentage over 4%, a steal percentage over 3%, and an assist percentage over 20% during his senior year. Herb Jones is a good passer. Tari Eason is not that type of passer. He only averaged like 2 assists per 40 minutes this season, but he had a 6.2 block percentage and a 4.5 steal percentage. Like both those are, well above what Herb Jones did his senior year. So like the defensive production from Tari Eason is absolutely there. And you look at him, I think, as a guy who could like be a very high upside defensive player, both on the ball and off the ball too.
He also has my favorite trait when we're talking about basketball players when they can't shoot. Well, it's my favorite. Every year we're like, oh, he's great at basketball. The only thing he's not good at is shooting and dribbling. And you're like,
well,
okay.
both of those things definitely high on the list here. Real quick, so some more background on him. He won a high school state title in Washington, beating out who? Paolo Banchero. He put up 21 and 14 points against Paolo in the championship game. Allegedly outplayed him en route to a state title, which is not a big deal, but it's something to take note of. Like I'm always interested in those things. Super athletic. I mean, he is a guy that has again, those big hands. He dunks a lot. He gets to the rim. He's a great get to the rim finish guy. I mean, that's kind of part of what it is. This is when I talk later on about him being raw. There's players that are raw but don't produce. Big red flag. When you're raw but you do produce, you still score even though you don't have very polished skill set.
You're a hooper.
I think he could be very intrigued.
And he's an aggressive guy. I mean, he got to the line a lot. That's how he scored a lot. He's also a guy that could help the Nuggets in transition where they are woeful on both ends. They just for whatever reason. And he's a guy who I think on both ends in that regard can help a lot. Look, the baseline thing with Tari, before you get into sort of nitpicking at some of these other details, you go, he is a wing. He fits. He is properly sized. He is a body type Denver is missing. He's a guy that you'd think could be a part of multiple defensive lineups because he has some versatility. So it's just one of the body types, one of the archetypes Denver is lacking.
I do wonder if he's a little bit more of a 3.5 and maybe even a 4 than he is a 3, but we'll talk about that here in a second.
Okay.
He was 5th in college in defensive box plus minus, plays with a great motor, and again, effective. we'll go now. You can pull up the strengths and weakness there, Kale, and I'll just kind of go through them. This is from my perspective. One-on-one defense, but also his help side defense is very strong. Like I think he's going to be a good defensive player if he. To me, his route to being a great NBA player is through being a great defensive player, and then the offense, fitting into with a system that he is placed into. But one-on-one defense, I just think he shows a lot of promise. Athleticism, I combine athleticism and body. Like he just has a great NBA body, just a great NBA body that I think will serve him, including those low hips. And then his motor. I mean, this is why I wanted to be careful with the Wilson Chandler comp, because while physically he might have some of the same measurables as a Wilson Chandler, he plays a lot more with the energy of a Jared Vanderbilt or somebody, like that, where he's always going hard. It's ugly at times, but he's always playing hard. And when you have the talent portion of your roster down, sometimes you just need a guy that plays hard and crashes into people and draws fouls. Weaknesses on the other side. Yeah, his shot's pretty ugly. As most of his game is pretty ugly. Like a lot of his scoop shots around the rim and stuff just are look like absolute garbage. But again, the production is what matters.
Did they go handle?
Not so much. His shots around the rim actually do go in a lot. I mean, some of this is that he dunks a lot, but some of it is also just that he's a head down rhinoceros. Handle uses his the worst part about him to me, maybe the most concerning part. There's parts of people's game, like some guys work on their shot, they just don't have good touch. Handle to me is the one where I'm like, you can kind of see where you are in development. He is maybe the most right hand dominant prospect I've ever seen. That guy makes moves to the left, like going right to left with his right hand, like just almost Stanley from The Office-esque in the way he would cross his body. So those things to me, when we say raw, there's raw as in you have to work on like pick and roll reads and this, that. And then there's raw that's like when you go left, you should use your left hand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, that's going to be a little concerning from a Nuggets perspective, because I really do think like they're not trying to take a project here. They're not trying to take an RJ Hampton, I don't think. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Calvin Booth is even, more of a draft dude than Tim Conley is. Like maybe Calvin Booth is just really looking to hit a home run with this long-term prospect. I don't think that's the case, but I just think they're going to want somebody who they feel comfortable throwing out there game one.
Right.
Yeah, and I guess what I mean, about being a wing, like I understand he is a little more of a power forward in terms of how he's been used. I just mean he's a body type that can guard 3-4 and get down to some twos probably even as well. We'll see how big the range is at the next level, but just a guy who can guard those 6'7", 6'8" dudes and be versatile. Denver just has very few of those guys.
Yeah, we'll go in quickly to wrap up this segment here. What position would he play in Denver? What's interesting about this, obviously, I think he's more of a prospect guy. Like, he would probably follow like a 2 or 3 year trajectory to getting real minutes. I don't think he's a guy like Bones that's going to come in and play a bunch. Although you never know. We'll see how the roster shakes out. But I think he is more like a Jeff Green. Meaning, to me, when I watch him play, I'm worried he might be best at power forward or at small forward alongside Michael Porter, as the two forwards.
Okay.
I don't know that it's going to be like you're going to go with him and AG and have a functional offense defense type. So that's one thing. Harrison, what do you think?
One thing, I just want to bring up one thing from the chat. KD goat. Great comment. Just absolutely perfect.
It's so true.
Flows
That's
with
super relevant. Hey,
he's the triple goat.
When do you think Tari might go in the draft?
We'll get there at the end, Vote. We'll get there at the end. You're jumping my show prep important. We have a little format here. We're going to do a problem.
Sometimes
Harrison,
what on Audible and Flow?
Harrison, positionally, what do you see him as at the next level?
I see him as a 3-4, but and maybe it's going to be tough because probably how much he can handle the ball is going to determine if he can play the 3. But I think it could be a 3, 3-4 shuffle between those two positions. But the thing you like about him is he can guard probably 1 through 5 maybe in some lineups. Like he is a prototypical switch guy on defense. Yeah, and I think that's something that's really exciting about him.
I like the Kuminga comp. The one thing I'll say about Kuminga, I don't know how they compare athletically. Kuminga is one of the best athletes I've ever seen. Like some of his dunks are so absurd. I'm like, holy hell. I think Eason is a really good athlete and he has that long wingspan, but he might be as good of an athlete. Kuminga really blows me away. When we go, all right, how does he fit with Jokic? So he's a long boy. That really matters. And he's an athlete. Like we just haven't given Jokic a ton of athletes. And I'm very curious if you did play him alongside, just again, in theory, these lineups probably won't ever happen. But if you did play him with Jamal, let's say Austin Rivers, and then him and Michael Porter next to Jokic, I would look at that and I'd go, defenses would have a hell of a time matching up with him and Michael Porter. They're both huge. They both have physical, like traits that make them hard to match up with. And you'd probably end up having to go bigger than you're comfortable with just to physically match up with both guys. And I love that. Like we haven't seen an athlete of that caliber alongside Jokic with those measurables outside of AG.
Yeah.
For sure. I mean, he is like, remember a couple of years ago when, the Nuggets, they were the long boys. They had all these longer, rangier guys. The height of the Jeremy Grant era is when this really happened. But they just went in the total opposite direction. It felt like a little bit. PJ Dozier was a part of that era as well.
Right.
But Tari Eason is definitely a long boy. Definitely a long boy.
Yeah. Draft superlative, I would give him the most disruptive defender. I don't know if he's the best, but he just gets a lot of steals, a lot of blocks, a lot of hands on the ball because he's, again, just has such a high motor and he has such weird measurables. And then lastly, will he be available at 21? I've seen a lot of people in the chat here. Probably not. We don't know. There's guys that rise or fall. One of the reasons we're going to cover everybody from like 10 to 30 or whatever is because Michael Porter, famously, we did not scout him when the Nuggets had that pick. And then we ended up being like, oh crap, we didn't even ever talk about him. So Tari, I don't think he's going to go like top 10 or anything like that. But most mocks do have him going comfortably ahead of Denver, 15, 14, 16, somewhere in that range. So he would be a draft day fall guy. All right, real quick, thumbs up or thumbs down on Tari Eason. What do you think, Bo?
I mean, my big concern would be drafting, like if he's more of a Jeff Green type. Like they have enough power forwards, but can he be more of a big three? An AG-esque kind of wing forward kind of deal with that defensive versatility and that size. So, I mean, I don't know what position he plays. Don't love the idea that he kind of looks like Torrey Craig when he's dribbling, but
totally
I love the idea of a versatile defender. So
yeah.
I think I'm mostly into it.
Eric, are you into it?
I mean, I'm just going off what you guys have said. I've not watched any footage of this guy except for the 3 shaky seconds. But I love the idea of having a big wing defender. That's absolutely something the Denver Nuggets need. I'd love, especially if we can have Jamal and MPJ coming back to provide the shooting that we are so sorely missing alongside Jokic, and then just like a lockdown defender, like that sounds amazing.
Yeah.
So I gotta see it. I can't.
He is like Torrey Craig, man. Like he both gets fouled a ton and fouls a ton. It's like it's perfect. He's a chaos player. It's kind of fun. Harrison?
Yeah, that was another thing about Tari Eason. He averaged 9.3 free throw attempts per 40 minutes.
It's a ton.
Like that's an insane amount. And he shot 80% from the free throw line in college. That bodes really well for his 3-point shooting going forward. Like 9.3 free throw attempts. The leader in college last year, Scottie Pippen Jr., shot 10.1 free throw attempts per 40 minutes.
Yeah.
So the guy drew foul after foul after foul after foul, and I think that is just kind of his mentality. He's just going to go the rim and attack the rim and use his athleticism and use his length. And just having that, that diving presence going to the rim, I think is something this team could definitely use. I like Tari Eason. Thumbs up for sure.
I'm thumbs up as well. He's not my typical type of prospect. There could be a bit of Jaden Springerness to this where we're all like picturing the best fill a need guy, not necessarily the best player. And like, we're like, man, if it works out the way he's supposed to, it's the perfect fix. So there might be a little bit of that, but I'm into him. And I do think that foul drawing is really intriguing, especially when you talk about he'll be attacking an empty paint all the time with Jokic dragging bigs out. So very intrigued. I like him. I don't think he'll be available at 21. I don't think the Nuggets will move up to get him. But But
Sweet.
he might be a guy that draft night, supposed to go 16. Oh, they passed on him. Okay, guy fallen. That might be a guy that you kind of take a look at. So we'll cross that bridge when it comes. All right.